For the first 50 years of the oil age, finding oil was almost pure luck. You picked a spot in the ground, you drilled, and you prayed. And most of the time, you got absolutely nothing. And then two brothers, working alongside a physicist, quietly found a way to see straight into the rock itself to know whether there was oil down there before you ever drilled a single foot. They never sold one drop of that oil. Instead, they sold sight. And it made them one of the most quietly powerful companies on the entire planet. This is the story of Schlumberger, the company now known as SLB. Here is a pattern worth learning. Call it selling the sight, not the gold. In any gold rush, almost everyone rushes in to dig for the gold, and most of them fail and go home broke. But the rare person who sells the one tool that lets every digger see where the gold actually is, that person gets paid by all of them, winners and losers alike, and never once has to compete with any of them for the prize itself. So travel back to the 1920s. Drilling for oil was still blind guesswork. You could pour an entire fortune down a single hole and hit nothing at all but rock and salt water. Nobody on earth could actually see what was lying beneath their own feet. The whole industry was, in a very real sense, gambling in complete darkness. But two brothers in France had spent long years chasing a strange idea, using electricity to map out what was hidden underground. And in 1927, in a modest little well in the Alsace region, they carefully lowered an electrical probe down into the earth and measured how the rock itself resisted the current, foot by foot, layer by layer. Different rocks and oil and water each pushed back against that current differently. And so, for the very first time in history, someone could actually read the hidden layers of the earth, almost like lines of text on a page. And here, exactly, was the fork in the road. They now held an enormous unfair advantage. They could see, better than anyone else alive, precisely where the oil was buried. The obvious, greedy move was to use that secret sight to quietly go and buy up the very richest land for themselves and become fabulously wealthy oil barons. But instead, they made a completely different and a far stranger choice. They decided that they would sell the site and never once touch the oil. They would run their measurement down absolutely anyone's, well, for a fee, and then simply hand the results straight back to whoever happened to be drilling it. They would compete with no one at all for the actual oil. And that single disciplined decision to remain nothing more than a neutral pair of eyes is the very thing that made them utterly indispensable to the entire industry. Now imagine they had instead done the obvious thing and used all of that secret knowledge to become big oil producers themselves. Think carefully about what would have happened next. The very instant they started bidding against everyone for the best land, every oil company on earth would have seen them as a deadly rival. And no one, ever again, would hand over their single most precious secret, the private data from deep inside their own wells, to a direct competitor who might use it to outbid them tomorrow. The measurement business, the real crown jewel of the whole thing, would have quietly withered into a private in-house stool. By refusing to touch the gold, they earned the right to serve every single person who dug for it. And that neutrality slowly became an unbreakable fortress. Because SSB competes with no oil company for oil, every oil company and every oil-rich nation on earth will trust it with their most sensitive underground secrets. It became the indispensable and almost completely invisible partner standing behind very nearly every single barrel pulled from the ground for close to 100 years. Today, SLB is the largest oilfield services company in the entire world, working across more than 100 different countries. It owns no oil at all of its own, and yet almost every drop that the planet burns has been found or measured or carefully coaxed out of the ground using its tools. It sells the one single thing that the whole industry simply cannot function without. It sells sight. And it has survived brutal oil clashes that gutted its own customers, forcing it to lay off tens of thousands of people and to reinvent itself again and again around each new wave of technology. Because the one thing that never ever goes out of demand in any boom or any bust is the simple ability to see clearly, exactly where everyone else is completely blind. Look back now at the shape of the whole story. An entire industry drilling blind. A pair of brothers who slowly learned to see straight into solid rock. And then the one crucial refusal, to not grab all the treasure for themselves, but instead to sell the map to every single person out there chasing it. The real fortune was never, ever in the gold. It was in the sight. So here is the lesson worth keeping. In any gold rush at all, you do not actually have to win the dig. You can win far more safely, and very often far more richly, simply by owning the one thing that lets everybody else finally see. So ask yourself, honestly, in whatever rush is going on all around you right now, is there some way to stop competing for the gold and instead to quietly become the one who sells the sight?